Well, Washington said the deal will trigger U.S. sanctions on both military and economic front. Turkey apparently can turn to Russia for help militarily. What about economically? Will the sanctions cripple the Turkish economy if they are adopted?
Well, when we look at the Turkish economy right now, it's on shaky footing after years of high growth. Now the Turkish economy is normalizing, and recent sanctions from last summer regarding the Pastor Brunson trial, the U.S. pastor that was detained in Turkey, we saw the U.S. Impose sanctions on Turkey, and it had a very negative impact on the Turkish lira. So obviously, if the United States decides to impose CATSA, which is a much broader sanction scheme against Turkey, it's definitely going to have a negative impact. Will it cripple the Turkish economy? No, but it will definitely put the Turkish economy in some hard times. Now, when we look at CATSA, it's a very complex sanctions package. There's 12 different sanctions that President Trump can choose from. He has to impose at least 5 of them. It also depends on which sanctions he decides to impose, and it depends on if he even wants to impose sanctions. He does have the power to sign a 180-day waiver, which is consecutively can be consecutively imposed. He can also delay the imposition of sanctions by 180 days if he can prove that it's a vital national interest to the U.S. to waive sanctions against Turkey. Now, Turkey is preparing itself. It is bracing for sanctions. So we're going to have to see how this unfolds when Turkey receives the S-400, which is any day now.
Yeah, but we have to be prepared for the worst scenario as well, right? So if is U.S. calling for Turkey's exclusion from NATO would possibly be one of the worst scenarios?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about NATO in the media. Will Turkey get kicked out of NATO? Will the U.S. try to kick Turkey out of NATO? We have to remember that NATO is a 29-country alliance. NATO is not the United States. NATO is Turkey. NATO is most of the EU countries and the United States. The United States can't take a unilateral decision to kick Turkey out of NATO, and NATO has no mechanism to remove a member. Now, the only way a member can be removed of NATO is if they want to be removed by themselves, and this is not something Turkey wants. So this whole U.S. Turkey problem is a U.S. Turkey problem. It's not a Turkey-NATO problem. The NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg has already said that Turkey's purchase of the S-400 is a sovereign right. Turkey can do what it wants. And we need to remember that Turkey's NATO's second largest country, second largest army, and it has boots on the ground. Its capabilities, its operational capabilities are second only to the United States and NATO. So no NATO country would want to see Turkey removed from the alliance. And we've already heard the Turkish foreign minister say that inside the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program, besides the United States, the other partners, the other customers, the other manufacturers are uncomfortable with America's decision to remove Turkey from the F-35, which is an unfortunate circumstance if Turkey buys the S-400 according to U.S. Congress.
Well, although U.S. is threatening with severe sanctions, Trump said at G20 that Erdogan was treated unfairly by Obama when he sought to buy Patriot air defense system, and the U.S. is looking at different solutions on the problem of S-400 deal. What different solutions other than military and economic sanctions would there be?
Well, when we look at the U.S.-Turkey relationship, we see that it's gotten very shallow over the years. It's turned into a security-based relationship, and when there's problems in the security facet of the relationship starts going sour. So what Turkey and the United States need to do is they need to establish a more deeper relationship on economy, on energy. So when he's talking about solutions, I'm assuming one of the things he's talking about is possibly providing Turkey at the moment a waiver sanction. And another problem, if Turkey's going to be removed from the F-35 project, the United States is going to have to give Turkey an alternative fighter jet. because if they're removed from the project, the same situation that happened with the S-400, Obama blocking the Patriot sale, led Turkey to buy the S-400. If Trump blocks, or I shouldn't say Trump, if U.S. Congress blocks the F-35 sale, Turkey's not going to sit around and cry, oh no, I don't have a fighter jet. They're going to go and buy a different fighter jet, most likely a Russian fighter jet, the Su-35 or the Su-57, which is going to cause the same problem from the beginning again. It's going to be Turkey buying another major Russian military asset, and it's going to make U.S. Congress angry, and we might have another situation with the S-400 unfolding. It's basically a paradoxical situation that the United States foreign policy is creating. So there needs to be solutions militarily to provide Turkey with something. They need to understand that Turkey needs to protect itself. It's in a very chaotic region. You have Syria as a neighbor, you have Iraq as a neighbor, you have Iran as a neighbor, you have a historical rival, Greece and Cyprus as neighbors. Turkey needs to protect itself. It needs a missile defense system. If you don't sell them the Patriots, Turkey needs to buy the S-400s. And this, Congress needs to understand this, the White House needs to understand this, the Pentagon needs to understand this.
Right, well, does Turkey's shift in defense strategy reduce its chances of becoming an EU member, which Turkey has been trying really hard to sort to happen?
Well, Turkey's relationship with the EU is multidimensional. Now, regardless of Turkey, quote unquote, shifting east, it has strong relations with many EU members via its accession negotiations, via its geography, via its membership in NATO. So when the security side of the relationship fails, you have to realize that Turkey has a customs trade agreement with the EU. There is an incredible amount of rich history and cultural exchange, a lot of tourism, import, export, energy relations via pipelines going towards Europe. So regardless of Turkey buying the S-400, I don't think it's going to impact Turkey's accession process, which is stalling at the moment, but it's not going to affect its accession process or its negotiations. We also have to realize that Turkey has 3.5 million Syrian refugees inside the country right now. And if these refugees were not in Turkey, they would be making their way towards Europe. And this is something very important to Europe, this migrant deal that they have signed with Turkey back in, I believe, 2017. So there's a lot of other interests between the EU and Turkey, and the relationship is deep, and this is not something that the EU would risk just because Turkey's buying the S-400. We also have to realize there's many EU nations that are former Soviet bloc countries as well, that have a lot of advanced Russian weapons and a lot of Russian weapons that have been left over. They call them Russian legacy weapons. So this is not unprecedented. There's many countries inside the EU, whether it be Bulgaria, Romania, that have S-300s, S-200s, and many other Russian weapons as well.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Yusuf Erim in Istanbul. He's an analyst on Turkish affairs. Thank you very much for your insight.